Welcome to the Busy Pastor Podcast. We're here to equip and encourage pastors to be busy with the right things. My name is Trent Stewart, lead pastor at Foothills Church, and today we're talking about defining your church's mission and vision. All right, the Busy Pastor Podcast is back. Man, it has been a long time coming. It's been a couple of years, actually. And honestly, we were busy with the right things. I mean, we had a project going on where we were building a nursery, our kids' spaces, renovating for office spaces. This is a huge project, as well as my co-host, Greg Gibson, decided to plant a church in Washington, D.C. So he left, which is great, but also I miss him. And then we also built a counseling center and bought some property. And so things have just been pretty hectic around here. But I'm glad to be back. I'm excited. And today I have a guest with me. His name is Pastor Taylor Knight. What's up, Taylor?
What's up? Glad to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. And tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. I am the campus pastor at our Knoxville location, and I've been in ministry for well over a decade and spent a lot of that time here at FC. And I've been busy being a father and a husband.
Absolutely.
Got three young kiddos.
That's a tough stage.
It is. I'm exhausted.
How old are your kids?
Let's see, 7, 5, and 6 months.
Oh man, so you're just like trying to survive every day.
100%.
And do ministry. That's tough.
Lots of naps.
Yeah. No, you're not getting any naps. Oh man. Well, man, I'm glad to have you on here. Taylor and I have been friends for several years, and I had the privilege of being his student pastor many a year ago. And so seeing him grow in the Lord, grow as a leader, and now serve alongside of me on staff is just absolutely the best. And he is a rock star of a pastor. So I'm excited to kind of hear what some of your thoughts are as we get into this conversation about mission and vision and values for our church. Let me just start off by asking you, what is our vision and mission here at Foothills Church?
Yeah. Well, the mission is to make disciples.
Yeah, well, that's the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Which is great because it never changes. So whatever church you're at, like, that's the mission.
Yeah, exactly. And then the vision, which is the kind of the unique expression of that mission in our context, is to develop mature disciples of Christ in relational environments.
Yeah. And that's kind of how we view it here. Like, the mission doesn't change. That's the Great Commission. Go and make disciples, right? Be a witness in Jerusalem, Judea, and the ends of the earth. And so that's pretty set in stone. The vision statement is just kind of how we say that creatively in our context. So I love that. And then our values, which I want to talk about today, but kind of list out our values and talk about what those mean.
Sure. Well, the first one is that Jesus is life, and that's about sharing the gospel. That's evangelism. Evangelism is the behavior that kind of follows from that value.
Yeah.
Jesus deserves our best. Is the next one. That's about authentic worship, passionate worship.
Yeah.
And worship is the behavior that follows. It's not about me. So that's that selfless serving that we're about here at FC. Growth happens in relationships. So that's about relational discipleship that leads us to be in discipleship. Number 5, generosity is a lifestyle. So it's about investing in the vision. We give, we invest in the mission. And then the next generation matters. It's about equipping the family to train up the next generation of disciples. And then number 7, you are sent. And that's about pursuing the mission of God. So these 7 values that we have, these are core things that kind of come out of the vision of our church. They're unique behaviors and expressions of that vision. So what would you say are some of the key steps to creating a mission and vision statement that reflects that call?
Yeah. Like we said, the mission is the Great Commission. So this is set in stone, and that vision statement is how we specifically try to accomplish that mission. And so core values are really these foundational beliefs, principles, they guide our church, our culture. They guide decisions that we make, actions that we make. And so core values are really what we view biblically as just convictions that we're going to live by as a church, as a staff. They're non-negotiables, and so they shape our identity, who we are, and what we're trying to do. And so, the question is, okay, so how do we create mission, or how do we create vision statements and values? And you've probably heard this before, but yeah, you've got to start with prayer. You're going to study scriptures, because the scripture is what's going to anchor this statement. It's going to anchor these values. I encourage you to talk to your people, like what do they see as values in your church, and talk to your staff about what they view as values in our church. Because if you're a lead pastor listening, you might think, X is a value, and your people or your staff might say, no, that's actually not, something that we see as a value here. Yeah. So you want to be honest about, that. And so talk to your people, know your community. Like, the context that you find yourself in is going to play a big part of what those values are going to be. And so understand those needs, and think through how that's going to, connect and intersect with your church's values. And then, your leadership team as well, collaborating with them, talking about our unique strengths, our opportunities that God has given to us in these situations. And so that's kind of how I would start. But I think, you don't want to overcomplicate it, because you want to start by realizing what you already value. You already have some values, right? So we don't select values, we understand them. Because they're already inside of us. We're already doing these things. These are the things that we're actually passionate about. So what are those 3, 4, 5, 6? We have 7 statements that really characterize your church. And then once you kind of write down like the behavior, the big picture idea, then you can start, formulating a statement that can help make it memorable. Because if it's not memorable, then it's gonna be hard for people to embrace. If it's like a 2-sentence statement and it's including a lot of churchy words, and it's including a lot of like language that's just choppy, it's going to be hard for people to memorize. I mean, It's Not About Me is a statement about serving that just is simple. And you just want to make it simple because you want people to memorize it. And then to help with that, you got to repeat it. We talk about one of our 7 values every week and put that before our people, because you have to repeat it. You got to repeat it again and say it 1,000,000 times. And after you say it 1,000,000 times, you need to say it 1,000,000 more times, because if they're that valuable, if they are that important, which we think they are, then you're going to have to keep coming back to them over and over and over again. And so, I would just ask, what's really important to your church? You can easily begin to say, we value evangelism, and we want to see people come to faith. But then when you look, at your yearly report, and like not very many people came to faith, then maybe you don't value that. And so be honest about what you really value, and where you put your money and where you put your energy is going to reflect what's important to you. So where are you spending your budget, and where do you spend your time, and how does the church spend its time with events and on Sunday mornings and with ministries throughout the week, to really begin to identify, okay, what do we really value? And I think the sad fact is, if you look at a lot of churches, their calendars, their budgets, their minutes from their meetings, you're going to discover that personal comfort is their value. And sometimes it's status quo. Like, that's our value. We just want to be status quo. We just want to show up and go home. And it's like, okay, well, that's not what we're called to be. And so what are we currently valuing? And I think it's important to kind of distinguish between aspirational values and true values. We had this discussion, a few years ago. We were like, we really valued the multi-site approach. But we couldn't really claim that as a value because we weren't a multi-site church yet. And so that was an aspirational value. But the true value is that we had that idea of you are sent. Like we really embraced that value. And so it led us to take, these simple, this not simple, but it led us to take this approach to begin to, follow God's direction in our life.
100%. Well, something that you said a little while ago that I wanted to circle back on, I think is important. When you planted Foothills, those 7 values didn't exist yet?
No, they
right?
didn't.
So because you talked about how like you're asking people around and you're asking whether it's staff or your people. So you can't necessarily start with those values.
Correct.
You have to kind of grow into them. What did that like for you as our lead pastor, what made you realize like, okay, now it's time to really hone in on what those things are and what our identity is?
I think that, if you're a church planner, you're at a young church, the idea or the ideal is, let's get a vision statement, let's get our values, and then let's charge hell with the water pistol. Mm-hmm. And it's almost like, well, sometimes that's putting the cart before the horse. Like you can create the vision statement, but really the values have to come out of our people and come from our people. And really, this is just my experience. I didn't know who we were, for a while. We're figuring out, yes, evangelism was important. Yes, discipleship. Yes, all the, what you might call the 5 purposes of the church. But, the statements and who we were and all of that was still getting fleshed out in those early days. And so, part of it is, in the early days, you're wondering if you're going to get a paycheck. Sometimes you're wondering if people are going to show up. Yeah. You're wondering if, this thing is going to work. So you don't really, have a lot of time to think about values.
Yeah.
That was part of it. It was kind of survival mode sometimes, but you get into that season to where now you have a few staff members and now it's like, okay, now it's time to kind of dive into this and take this a little bit deeper.
Yeah. When you were talking about the aspirational versus the true values, as we dialed those in, you talked about becoming a multi-site church. Were there some things that you thought we were, or you thought we valued that you kind of weeded out or that kind of rose to the surface? Can you remember any examples from that?
Well, I mean, there's definitely times where we've had to circle back and say, hey, this is a value, right?
Yeah.
And we've let this, we've neglected this. And so I definitely believe we've seen that happen. And from time to time, there's been the reminder, there's been somebody on the staff, there's been somebody, close to me that's reminded me that, hey, this is what we're about. And so, that's been helpful. And the thing about, values is like, they really are values. And at the same time, sometimes, it's why we're doing this podcast. You get so busy that you can neglect something. It's just like being married, and having kids. It's like you love your wife, you love your kids. And then, there are seasons where you're like, wait a minute, I haven't been paying attention to this particular, part of my family or whatever. And so those reminders are super helpful.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Well, how does a clear mission and vision impact the day-to-day decisions in a church?
Yeah. This is why it's important, because it does impact your people. And I think it teaches your people to value Scripture, because these are big picture values. Like if the value is evangelism, right? That is a big picture, biblical understanding. And if we're not talking about it, simplifying it, sharing examples, putting it before our people, teaching our people, giving our people opportunities to actually do evangelism, then we're neglecting to be the shepherds and leaders of our church. And so
Hmm.
the Bible is complex, and a lot of people are intimidated, by Scripture. And so it's hard for some people to wrap their head around some of the, principles. So values can help break down those complex ideas into simple phrases that they can understand, and then they can get excited about, and then it can, which the second part of the answer is that it brings alignment to the church. These are the things that who we are. These are the things that we're excited about and the things that we're going to do. And so that alignment is huge, because, clear values begin to rule out options, and they begin to rule out people. And, that's one of the things I think pastors are afraid of. Sometimes they struggle with the idea that somebody's going to leave their church, and I don't want anybody to leave my church. I know you don't either. Like, that's never something that we, typically want. But sometimes when someone doesn't align with the values that we have as a church, then, the best thing for them to do is to go find a church that does, because when people aren't in alignment, it's going to disunify. It's going to be a very difficult, it's just going to be a difficult person to bring along, on the team. So, you're gonna rule out some options. You're gonna begin to be able to use your values as a filter for decision making. So when people come up and say, "Hey, we need a ministry for this situation, and we need more money for this situation," or all these kinds of things, then your values become the baseline to make some of these decisions for you. I don't have to be the bad guy. It's like, well, we can't really fit that in, because the next gen matters, and we do things, for our student ministry on this night, and this is what we do for kids on this day. And so it begins to help focus your programs in your ministries, and it begins to help prioritize those ministries, who gets, the resources and what doesn't. And what I have found is that unifies our church. It gives us direction. And in a chaotic world, that's what people are looking for. They want unity, and they want direction. And then I would say, lastly, the reason why I think, for like day to day, why it matters is because, like I mentioned earlier, it holds us accountable. These are values that are important. God is calling us to these things. And so if something gets neglected, we hold each other accountable on these things.
Yeah. And would you probably say that accountability is something that exists both for your staff and for the members of our church, right?
Yeah.
Not just lay people and our team.
Yeah. I mean, if your team doesn't embody them, then that you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
You want to align the team first around those values, and get everybody on pace with that. Because if a staff member is not aligned to any of the values that you have and the direction that you have, then you're really it's creating division and sideways energy, and there's tension, and I think it's Larry Osborne that talks about that squeaky wheel.
Yeah.
And then you end up spending so much time dealing with the squeaky wheel that you're not actually accomplishing the things that God's calling you to do. So, yeah, having your staff in alignment is a whole nother podcast that we'll hit.
No doubt. Well, what are some of the mistakes that you've seen other pastors make as they're trying to define what their mission is and then implementing it?
Yeah, I think it's the same things we've struggled with, but I think sometimes in creating these and spending the time to create them, I think some guys might overcomplicate it. And just like, it's just too hard. It's just so much work to get all these things done. And then is it really worth it? I think sometimes it's not worth it. And I think sometimes, because when something gets talked about so much, some guys just press back on what everybody else is doing. It's just like, oh, that big church is doing that, or this church, they do all that. We're not doing that because we don't need that. We got the Bible. Well, obviously that's where we get our values, but this is really, when you're talking about values, you're really talking about how do you lead people? How do you shepherd people? Yeah. And how do you get the flock to move forward? Well, values do that. They help you move people forward. They help you move them into a system and a pathway to be able to help them take steps of faith to allow them to grow. And so, some guys overcomplicate it, some guys, over dramatize it, and then I think a big mistake is just not living them out. That could be the biggest. If you're going to put it up on the wall, you better live it out. And if you're not living it out, then that's probably going to create more tension in the church.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you said earlier, you were talking about the, not using Christianese and things like that. And I feel like that's one of the things that I've seen a lot of churches do that I personally I hate it, because to a spiritually immature person or an unchurched person, they see those things, those statements that are Christianese, and they don't make sense to them because they don't know what verse that came from or whatever it is. And it's messy, but
I think just keeping it simple.
Yeah.
You want to keep it simple, because it's got to be repeatable. It's got to be something that people can understand easily. And I think that's part of, what helps move them forward is when they can actually understand it.
So let's say, we've got the values, you got the mission and vision, it's clear, it's concise. How do you begin to communicate that effectively to both staff and your church?
Yeah, it's a lot about just repetition. It comes across in every one of our services on Sunday. For us, we're going to take one of those values and we're going to talk about it. And so that's going to be, before we take up an offering, we're going to talk about a value and we're going to connect it to why we give. So that repetition is helpful. I think we communicate it through storytelling, and this person was, came to faith, and the reason why they came to faith is because of this situation and this person in their life. And so now we're connecting them to the vision or the value of you are sent. And we're connecting to the value of Jesus's life and how it's coming together. And that's, those stories are just inspiring for people, and then just visual reminders as well. Like we've got some statements, on the wall. So as people see those, they're reminded of those. And I know a lot of times people make fun of, it's on the wall, but people aren't actually doing it. It's just something that looks pretty on the wall. But I think you can do both. I think you can have it on the wall and let it be a piece of artwork, but then it can also be something that we're actually, doing. And so, a lot of things as well as just like including values in our sermon series and letting our values really direct some of those sermon series, and putting them into the actual sermon and reminding people through that way. I think every week in our either staff meetings or one-on-one meetings or in our volunteer meetings, we're sharing those, putting those before our people. And it really helps when you have these, because then it kind of guides what you're going to talk about that day. Because, a lot of times, guys are showing up to a volunteer meeting or they're showing up to a meeting like, what am I going to talk about? There's a million things to talk about. And so, they're rifling through their notes or their Bible or something to kind of pick a topic. And it's like, well, just let your values guide it. And so start with that, and then, go to scripture from there. And so those are just easy kind of practical ways.
Yeah. I thought another thing I've seen you do really well here at FC is you actually, not just in the beginning when we first nailed down the values, but even after that, you consistently sit down with our entire staff and you'll spend a solid 30 minutes like teaching that value, not just what it is, not just here is the value, but like scripturally, practically, here's how we live this out. Because obviously if our staff is the lid to us embodying that value, then we have to be bought in. We have to be aligned. Yeah. And I've seen you've done that very consistently. Again, not just once, but continually, repeatedly. And another thing I feel like our team does really good here is all of our, and you kind of alluded to this, is all of our call to actions, whether it's getting into a small group or finding a team to serve on or beginning to give for the first time, whether it's in a video, it's on the website, wherever it is, that value is the language for how we're communicating that. And so I just, the only word I can think of to describe it's immersive. Mm-hmm. Like it's in front of you, on the wall, in the script, on the website, like it's everywhere. Yeah. And it's just, you can't get around it. Yeah. Which I love.
Well, that's a great way to end this episode. It is immersive. And I think that's a great way to just kind of, think about how your values really are so important, for
Mm,
you as a leader, for you leading your team, your staff, your church, that you are immersed
mm,
in these values.
100%.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Busy Pastor podcast. We are going to continue this conversation in the next episode. But I'd love to ask you to do a couple of things for us. Follow us on Instagram at Busy Pastor or on Facebook. And also, if you found today's episode to be helpful, leave us a positive review wherever you get your podcast. That goes a long way to help put that in front of other people. And we're excited to continue this. And thanks for joining us today. Until next time, be busy with the right things.